But what Richard Branson taught me is to start small and to get big. And I'm so glad you made it here. Before you watch this video, click the subscribe button and ring the bell so that you get access and notifications to 3 videos a week on the art and science of ethical influence. I'll appreciate it, and so will many. Now, what is wisdom? Let me show you what wisdom is. Now, this, I just dropped the pencil. This is a pencil. If you're old enough to know what this is, if you're a millennial or younger, you may not know what this is. But this is a pencil, and this is without being sharpened or used. Just a baby. The eraser hasn't been used. The lead hasn't been used. This is no knowledge whatsoever. Now, this is a bunch of knowledge because it's shorter. It's been used. There's the lead that's been sharpened. There's the eraser that's been used. And then let me show you wisdom. This is wisdom. Why? Because less eraser and more lead used up. So I'm going to start with nothing, no wisdom or knowledge, just the starting point, which you may be in your business, then knowledge, then wisdom. Okay. I think it's a pretty cool analogy. This is a starting point. This is an acorn that came from an oak tree outside of my office, just literally about 250 feet away from where I'm sitting. And this thing, over 100 years, they say, has turned into a giant oak tree outside. Not this particular one, but one that dropped to the ground about 100 years ago. And it's turned into an oak tree that weighs probably 22 to 25,000 tons. Massive. If the oak tree fell over, it would literally crush this building. So it's just one of the laws of nature or karma or cause and effect, whatever your persuasion. And that is everything big always started small. From a baby, right? You started as a little swimmer, you got in 40 weeks later, hopefully you came out head first, or your mother really remembers you, or the Big Bang theory, if whether or not you believe in that, 14.5 billion years ago, the earth wasn't invented. So I don't know how they can say it's 14.5 billion years ago, but it started, literally nothing, like an acorn, and then banged, and look how big, the universe is now. We know that it's massive, mostly space. So a watermelon seed turns into a watermelon. Your small business turns into a massive business. Apple was once small. Intel was once small. Amazon.com was once small. Zappos was once small. So everything big was once small. So that's the way it begins, right? Now, the only difference is wisdom. With this pencil analogy, you start with a lot more potential wisdom. Then you go to knowledge, which is what you learn, and then you go to wisdom. And just check it out. I'd rather have wisdom, wouldn't you? Now, the easiest way to attract and to gain wisdom is not to do it yourself. That's foolish, because there's not enough time in life. Let's say you live to 100 years, not enough time, like 1/10 of a century. The easiest way is to borrow the wisdom from others. A single 1-hour interview can generate more rapport, more friendship, more strategic alliance with someone whom you don't really know well than maybe 100 meetings over the course of a lifetime that last 5 to 10 minutes. And the reason for that is, if you interview someone, in my experience, is you are celebrating them in public, and they're celebrating themselves. They work super, super hard. And when someone else celebrates them, they appreciate it. And because you're the messenger, they appreciate you in the process. So I've done that over the years. There are many, many interviewers, including Larry King, my good friend Joe Polish, who's interviewed hundreds of thought leaders over the years in various industries, and others, who make a living interviewing as their chief method of exposure. John Lee Dumas, great podcaster. He started interviewing thought leaders, and that just blew up his podcast, and he makes millions. He prints, or he publishes what he makes on his website, right? It's eofire.com if you want to check it out. Friend of mine. And it's all about interviews. But this is not about interviews today. What this is about is what I learned from those interviews to save you time. Because over the past 12 years, this is what I've learned from certain thought leaders. Now, I've done nearly 4,000 interviews in 28 years at the time of this recording, but most of these interviews came from within the last 12 years. So let's start with a question. What is a thought leader? Okay. What does wise mean? Well, wise or wisdom comes from the root, wise or wizard, right? And a wizard is someone who knows all, right? And has magical powers. Okay. And we know this through movies and through books and through ancient stories going back to, 200-300 years, even 2,000 years. But for me, wisdom is one thing, and it's a quotation I learned from a former Chief Justice of the United States, probably the most quoted Chief Justice of the United States, Oliver Wendell Holmes. Should look it up. And he talks about simplicity on the far side of complexity. Now, the quote goes, I wouldn't give a fig, as in the fruit, right? I wouldn't give a fig for simplicity on the near side of complexity, but I would give my life for simplicity on the far side of complexity, or the other side. So if I were to show you a graph, then on the y-axis, which is north and south, if you remember your geometry in school, it would be complexity. And on the x-axis, which is time, that would be time, right? So if you're going this way, that's more time. If you're going up, that's more complex. So the knowledge curve is a bell curve, which you probably remember from school. Maybe it haunted you. Now, on the near side of the bell curve, that's just called knowledge. That is transitioning to wisdom. You learn something again and again and again, or maybe you got to keep learning and keep learning and keep learning. You get divorced once, then twice, then 3 times, from ideas, from people, from colleagues, right? And then you get what's called wisdom, which I believe is far side knowledge. Now, this is complexity. This is the complexity of going through that Shawshank Redemption tunnel. There's a 3-hour movie called The Shawshank Redemption. Love that movie. And it's about a character, Andy Dufresne, who was charged with murder, but he was framed. And to escape the prison, he didn't swim like from Alcatraz. He crawled through 500 yards or meters of sewage to go out to the other end. And it was raining, torrential rain, but he was free. Great movie. Check it out. Now, this is what it normally looks like if you do it on your own. And I believe there's no such thing as a self-made success. This is the BW effect, borrowed wisdom. That's what BW stands for, borrowed wisdom, right? You borrow credibility from people, right? If you interview them. Well, this is borrowed wisdom, where wisdom comes to you faster and easier, and you don't have to wait till you're age 80 in your rocking chair. Okay, the bell curve is not as high. It doesn't get as complex, and knowledge turns into wisdom faster, better, and easier. And this complexity is not as complex because you're borrowing the wisdom from your mentor. Okay, that's what they call it in Greece. From your lama, that's what they call it in Tibet. From your guide, they call that in the United Kingdom. Tutor, that's in France. Guru, that's in India. Coach, they call that in the person I'm talking about, someone who's more wise than you are. That's in America. Sensei, that's in Japan. Maestro, that's in Italy. Whatever you call it, they have plowed the ground before you. And if you borrow their wisdom, then that makes a lot more sense. It's not as foolish than learning on your own. So here's the key point. Borrowed wisdom saves time and money and grief and embarrassment and all that other stuff. You can throw in stress and all the things that you don't like to think about, stress and worry, etc. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to teach you to the best of my ability. And if we're strangers, thank you for sticking around for me, because you're telling me by staying here that you trust what I'm about to teach. So keep watching, because you're about to learn what I've learned from interviewing thought leaders. And there is a $sign here because, first of all, I'm in America, and that is what money means. But you can take wisdom and monetize it. So knowledge you can monetize, but I believe it has to be wisdom first, which is principle centered. Otherwise, knowledge becomes obsolete. Spamming at one time probably worked, right? Maybe in the 1990s, but then it stopped working. And Google AdWords worked a lot better when it wasn't as expensive. And today it's all about Facebook advertising, right? And one day that will become obsolete. Ooh, boy, I just offended a few people, but I'm just guessing. One day email may become obsolete. I'm going back to direct mail. I'm taking the E out of email, and that way it's something physical that people can touch. Because virtual, okay, that's kind of cool, the whole virtual reality thing. But I think people start losing the consciousness between what's real and what's not. So, maybe we live in the matrix, but I want to focus on what's real. So let's start with a thought leader who owns an island, who's done a lot for entrepreneurs like me and my colleagues, and that is Richard Branson, Sir Richard Branson. And what I learned from him is the principle of adventure. Now, this is not the hero's journey, as you've probably learned over the years from the Lord of the Rings series or the Harry Potter series. Most great characters and protagonists of antiquity go through a hero's journey. You probably have a hero's journey from your Genesis or origin story till now, and it's important to tell it. But what Richard Branson taught me is to start small and to get big. And with Virgin Records, when he came out with that, the Virgin Airlines was nowhere to be found in sight. And one time he was stuck on some islands, and he decided to start fast, which is one of the principles that he doesn't really teach. He's kind of a shy guy, to be honest. He doesn't really teach it, but he demonstrates it. So he just started fast, and he started small in Virgin Airlines and all the other Virgin companies. So start small, and you want to start fast, ready, fire, aim, do whatever it takes. This is a whatever it takes t-shirt from a colleague, student, and friend of mine, Azim from Australia. This is not an oak tree because it fell from one outside of my office, but one that fell over 100 years ago turned into that oak tree outside, and it's probably over 20,000 tons, and it's massive, it's huge, and it started small. The Big Bang, small to massive, right? Whether you believe in it or not. A watermelon seed to a watermelon, right? How about you? You were a swimmer, and then, 40 weeks later, hopefully you came out head first. Otherwise, your mother will remember you. I always say that because most mothers remember their children who didn't come out head first. So one thing that Richard Branson taught me is, business is an adventure. And in an adventure, you just got to start. You're a quick start. Kathy Kolbe has an assessment called the Kolbe assessment, and I've taken it. And one of the dimensions of it is being a quick start, which I am. I'm not a level 10, but I'm pretty far up there. And starting quick and failing fast is super important, which Richard Branson has done. But something else he taught me is license things. He doesn't, this is what I've been told through insiders because I didn't ask him this, but my understanding, and if I'm wrong, you can correct me if you really know the truth, but Sir Richard Branson doesn't own the companies, definitely not the majority of the stocks of the Virgin company line of products and services. He licenses things from Virgin because, with the white hair, and he's very well known and you can spot him, he gets a licensing fee. I believe it's somewhere between 6% on everything that he decides to touch. Kind of like Disney, there's a massive licensing appeal for Sir Richard Branson because he's bigger than life. And one other thing that I believe in, because the Rockefellers taught me this. In fact, John D. Rockefeller, original, he didn't own any oil wells. He created what lit the streets, kerosene. Did you know that? That's what he did. It came from oil, but he didn't own the oil wells. In fact, he owned very little. He was more of a service provider after things were refined. And he said, own nothing and control everything. The reason my eyes are darting down here is because I just made a few notes so I don't forget anything. I want to remember this. And that's what Richard Branson does as a licensor. The philosophy is own nothing and control everything. It's not ownership where all the money comes in. It's not ownership where you get the nectar extracted from the fruit. It's in control. And that is the lifestyle, and that's the type of business person I want to develop once my brand gets bigger, better, and more exposed. Text the keyword you see on your screen to this mobile number, 415-980-3555. Now, if it's your first time visiting, please subscribe to this channel. And if you've done this before, stick around because we have another high impact and high influence video coming right after this one. All good wishes.